The sun was dipping low over Austin, Texas, painting the sky in streaks of orange as Jake Torres wiped grease from his hands onto a rag. He'd spent the afternoon under the hood of his neighbor's beat-up sedan, fixing a busted carburetor for free. Mrs. Alvarez, a widowed grandmother who lived 2 doors down, had called him a saint and pressed a plate of tamales into his hands as thanks. Jake just grinned, shrugging it off. Helping out was what he did, always had. At 32, he was the guy who'd stop to jumpstart her car or haul your groceries up 3 flights of stairs without being asked. His hands were calloused from years as a mechanic, but his smile was easy, the kind that made strangers trust him. He pushed open the front door of his small, 1-story house on the edge of the city, expecting to hear Lauren's voice humming along to some indie playlist or the clatter of her sketching pencils on the kitchen table. She was a graphic designer, 30, with a restless energy that Jake always found magnetic, even when it left him scrambling to keep up. But the house was silent. Too silent. The kind of quiet that feels like it's holding its breath. Jake set the tamales on the counter and froze. There, in the middle of the hallway, sat a dark blue suitcase. Not his. It was dented, zipped tight, positioned with a precision that felt deliberate, like it was meant to be seen. His stomach twisted. "Lauren," he called, his voice sharper than he intended. No answer. He stepped closer, socks silent on the hardwood, and noticed the faint scent in the air, lavender mixed with something smokier, unfamiliar. Not her usual perfume. Not his either. He moved to their bedroom, the door slightly ajar. The hook where Lauren kept her favorite turquoise bracelet was empty. Her faded gray nightshirt, the one she wore religiously despite a bleach stain on the sleeve, was folded neatly on the dresser. Too neatly. Jake's pulse quickened. Lauren didn't fold things like that. She was a whirlwind, clothes tossed over chairs, sketchbooks left open on the couch. This wasn't a rush job. This was intentional. His phone buzzed in his pocket. An email notification. No subject, no sender name, just an attachment titled, "Thought you should know." JPG. His thumb hesitated over the screen, but he tapped it open. The image loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, until it hit him like a punch. It was blurry, taken through a window, but unmistakable. Lauren, her dark hair spilling over her shoulders, sitting on a man's lap. Laughing. Not the polite laugh she used at client meetings, but the real one, the one Jake thought was reserved for him. The man's face was shadowed, but his hand rested on her waist, possessive. Jake's grip tightened until his knuckles whitened. He didn't throw the phone, didn't yell. He just stood there, the silence louder than any scream. He checked the closet. Half her clothes were gone. Not the flashy ones, but the practical ones, the jeans and sweaters she'd wear for a long trip. Her laptop was missing too. No note, no text, no trace except that suitcase and the photo burning a hole in his mind. Jake sank onto the edge of the bed, staring at the folded nightshirt. It wasn't anger that hit him first. It was the realization that she'd planned this. She'd packed, folded, left, all while he was out fixing Mrs. Alvarez's car, thinking everything was fine. Jake didn't sleep that night. He sat on the porch, ignoring the late summer heat, replaying every moment of the last few months. The late nights, she claimed, were for deadlines. The way she'd stopped meeting his eyes during dinner. The excuses for canceling their anniversary trip to the Gulf Coast. The one he'd been saving for in secret. He'd thought she was just stressed. He'd thought wrong. By morning, he'd made a decision. He wasn't going to chase her. He wasn't going to call, beg, or confront her. He'd spent years being the steady one. The one who fixed things, cars, arguments, her bad days. But he couldn't fix this. Instead, he walked to the bank, withdrew every dollar from his account, including the $2,000 he'd tucked away for that trip. He didn't pack much, just a backpack with a change of clothes and his toolbox. At the bus station, he bought a one-way ticket to a small coastal town in Oregon called Tillamook, a name he'd overheard a customer mention once. It sounded far enough. On the bus, he left his phone on the seat next to a sleeping stranger, its screen flashing with a missed call from an unknown number. He didn't look back as he stepped off in Portland and caught a connecting ride to the coast. The suitcase, the photo, Lauren's laugh, they all stayed in Austin. He told himself he was done. He told himself disappearing was freedom. In Tillamook, Jake found a rhythm. The town was small, salty air clinging to everything. The kind of place where seagulls outnumbered people. He rented a shack near the docks for cheap, cash up front, no questions asked. The locals liked him. He fixed boat engines for fishermen, bartered labor for groceries, and taught a kid named Sam how to clean a spark plug. For the first time in months, he felt useful, not invisible. But at night, when the waves crashed and the shack creaked, Lauren's face crept back. The suitcase, the laugh, the stranger's hand. 3 months in, everything changed. It was dusk, the sky gray and heavy with rain, when he heard tires crunching on the gravel outside his shack. Not the loud rumble of a local pickup, but a slow, hesitant crawl, like someone wasn't sure they should be there. Jake stood at his window, peering through a crack in the blinds. A gray sedan idled in the driveway. The door opened, and there she was, Lauren. Her hair was darker, chopped shorter, her frame thinner than he remembered. She stood there, clutching her phone, looking at his shack like it might bite. "Jake," she said, her voice small, practiced. He didn't move, didn't open the door. His heart hammered, but his feet stayed rooted. She stepped closer, her boots crunching louder now. "I know you don't want to see me. I didn't know where else to go. You disappeared." He opened the door but stayed in the frame, arms crossed. You disappeared first." Her eyes dropped, hands trembling. "I deserve that. I ended it, Jake. Months ago. It wasn't what you think." He laughed, sharp and cold. "You think I've been sitting here wondering what it was? I saw the photo, Lauren. You look happy." She flinched, but didn't retreat. "I came alone," she said. "I need to explain. Not to fix us, just to tell you the truth." She pulled a crumpled envelope from her pocket and held it out. "I wrote this the night you left. I didn't send it because you were gone. No trafe. I've been carrying it ever since." Jake stared at the envelope, his jaw tight. He didn't take it. "You made your choice," he said. "I made mine." She nodded, setting the envelope on the porch step. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just read it when you're ready." She turned, walked back to her car, and drove off, the taillights fading into the Oregon mist. Jake didn't touch the envelope that night. He left it there, like a landmine he wasn't ready to step on, and went back inside. The shack felt smaller, the air heavier. He'd come to Tillamook to escape, to become a ghost. But ghosts don't get to choose who haunts them. Jake Torres woke to the sound of seagulls and the faint creak of his shack's tin roof under the Oregon drizzle. Tillamook's salty air clung to his skin as he brewed coffee in a dented pot, the routine grounding him in a life he'd carved out over 3 months. The coastal town was small, its docks lined with fishing boats that bobbed like restless dogs waiting for their owners. Jake, 32, had become a fixture here, fixing engines for grizzled fishermen who paid him in cash, crab, or stories of storms they'd outrun. He liked the work, grease under his nails, the hum of the motor coming back to life. It was honest, unlike the life he'd left in Austin. His shack was sparse. A cot, a table, a single chair. No photos, no reminders of the past. But last night's visitor, Lauren, had cracked that carefully built wall. Her envelope sat untouched on the porch step, soggy from the rain, a silent challenge he wasn't ready to face. He'd come here to disappear, to shed the weight of her betrayal. The suitcase in their hallway, the photo of her laughing on another man's lap. Yet here she was, dragging Austin back to him like a tide pulling in debris. Jake grabbed his toolbox and headed to the docks, hoping work would drown out the noise in his head. He spent the morning elbow deep in a boat's fuel pump, teaching Sam, a lanky 15-year-old with dreams of owning his own charter, how to spot a clog line. "You're too good at this," Sam said, grinning as the engine roared to life. Jake shrugged, tossing him a rag. "Just listen to the machine. It'll tell you what's wrong." Helping Sam felt good, like he was more than a ghost haunting his own life. By noon, the drizzle had stopped, and Jake sat on a crate eating a sandwich from the local deli. His eyes kept drifting to the horizon, half expecting Lauren's gray sedan to reappear. She'd said she ended the affair, that it wasn't what he thought. He didn't buy it. The photo didn't lie. Her laugh, her ease, the stranger's hand on her waist. Jake had spent years being her anchor, fixing her bad days, believing her late-night deadlines. He'd been blind, and she'd been gone long before she left. Back at the shack that evening, the envelope was still there, now warped and smudged. He stepped over it, refusing to give it power, and cooked a can of soup on his hot plate. But as the sky darkened, the quiet grew heavy, pressing against his resolve. He poured a glass of water, sat at his table, and stared at the door. Why had she come? Why now? Tracking him down through a boat repair invoice meant effort, desperation even. Lauren wasn't the type to chase. She was the type to run. He thought back to their last years in Austin. Lauren, 30, had always been a spark. Her graphic design work was bold, her laugh infectious, her energy pulling him in like gravity. But she'd grown restless, her sketches piling up unfinished, her nights spent scrolling her phone instead of talking. Jake had chalked it up to stress, thinking he could fix it with patience, with love. He'd been wrong. The suitcase, the folded nightshirt, the missing bracelet, they weren't accidents. They were her exit strategy. Around 9 p.m., unable to sit still, Jake grabbed a flashlight and walked to the beach. The waves crashed, relentless, and he let the sound fill the space where his thoughts churned. He wasn't angry anymore, not like he'd been in Austin, when he'd emptied his bank account and bought a one-way ticket to nowhere. Now he was just tired. Tired of carrying her betrayal, tired of wondering what he'd missed. He sat on a driftwood log, the cold seeping through his jeans, and let himself imagine opening the envelope. What could she possibly say that would change anything? When he returned to the shack, the envelope was still there, mocking him. He finally picked it up, the paper damp against his fingers, and brought it inside. He didn't open it. Instead, he set it on the table next to his toolbox, like it was just another job he'd get to eventually. Sleep came fitfully, broken by dreams of Austin's streets and Lauren's voice calling his name. The next morning, a knock startled him awake. It was Percy, an old fisherman with a beard like steel wool, holding a thermos of coffee. "Heard you had a visitor," Percy said, leaning against the doorframe. "City girl, huh? Trouble follows that kind." Jake forced a smile, brushing it off. "Just someone passing through." Percy raised an eyebrow, but didn't push, offering the thermos instead. Jake took it, grateful for the distraction. Days passed, each one a test of willpower. The envelope sat untouched, but its presence grew louder. Jake threw himself into work, rebuilding a carburetor for a trawler, helping Sam fix a neighbor's outboard motor. The kid was a quick learner, and Jake found himself talking more, sharing tricks of the trade. "You ever think about going back?" Sam asked one afternoon, wiping grease from his hands. Jake paused, the question cutting deeper than it should. "Nothing to go back to," he said, and meant it. But on the fifth night, the envelope won. Jake sat at his table, the shack lit by a single bulb, and tore it open. The paper was creased, the ink smudged in places, as if Lauren had hesitated while writing. Her handwriting was shaky but unmistakable. She didn't start with apologies. Instead, she wrote about the night he left, how she'd come home to an empty house and realized he'd vanished without a trace. She admitted to the affair, not out of love, but desperation, a need to feel something other than the weight of her own unraveling. She'd lost her job months before, lied about it, pawned her grandmother's ring to pay bills. The man in the photo, Shane, was a mistake, a fleeting escape from the guilt eating her alive. "I didn't leave to hurt you," she wrote. "I left because I was already broken, and I didn't know how to tell you without breaking you too." She described driving through small towns, chasing rumors of a mechanic named Jake, carrying the letter like a talisman. She found him through a dock worker who remembered his name on an invoice. "I don't expect forgiveness," she ended. "I just needed you to know I'm not the person in that photo. I haven't been for a long time." Jake folded the letter, his hands steady but his chest tight. He didn't feel rage or relief, just a hollow ache. He'd run to Tillamook to escape her, but she'd found him anyway. And now, with her truth sitting in his hands, he had to decide what to do with it. The next morning, his phone, a cheap burner he'd bought for emergencies, buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Mia, Lauren's sister, who'd never liked him. 5 words. "You need to come now." Jake stared at the screen, the words pulling him back to a life he thought he'd left behind. He didn't know what was waiting, but he knew he couldn't stay a ghost forever. Jake Torres sat at the rickety table in his Tillamook shack, the crumpled envelope from Lauren staring back at him like an uninvited guest. The Oregon rain tapped steadily against the tin roof, a rhythm that matched the pulse in his temples. For 5 days, he'd avoided the letter, letting it sit on the porch until it was soggy, then moving it inside but refusing to open it. He'd come to this coastal town to escape. Her betrayal, the suitcase, the photo of her laughing on another man's lap. But her words, now in his hands, had a gravity he couldn't ignore. At 32, Jake was used to fixing things, boat engines, neighbors' problems, his own quiet pain, but this felt like a machine too broken to repair. He tore the envelope open late that fifth night, under the dim glow of a single bulb. Lauren's handwriting spilled across the page, uneven, smudged in places like she'd paused to wipe her eyes. She didn't beg for forgiveness. Instead, she laid out her unraveling. The affair with Shane wasn't love, but a desperate grab for something to feel alive. She'd lost her job as a graphic designer months before she left, lied to Jake about late-night deadlines, and pawned her grandmother's ring to cover rent. The suitcase in their Austin hallway wasn't an impulse. It was her attempt to disappear before her lies consumed them both. "I thought if I made you hate me, it'd be easier for you to move on," she wrote. She tracked him to Tillamook through a dock worker who remembered his name on a repair invoice, carrying the letter for months, hoping for a chance to explain. Jake folded the paper, his jaw tight. The letter didn't erase the hurt, it sharpened it. He'd spent years being her anchor, thinking his patience was enough, but she'd been drowning in her own guilt, and he hadn't seen it. He set the letter beside his toolbox, unsure if he wanted to burn it or keep it, and try to sleep. The shack's creaks and the distant crash of waves kept him awake, her words looping in his mind. "I'm not the person in that photo." The next morning, Jake threw himself into work at the docks, helping Sam, the 15-year-old who idolized him, rebuild a boat's throttle. The kid's chatter about fishing trips and dreams of captaining his own charter was a welcome distraction. "You ever miss the city?" Sam asked, tightening a bolt. Jake shook his head. "This is home now." But the lie felt thin. Tillamook was a refuge, not a home. He'd built a life here, fixing engines, bartering for groceries, earning nods from fishermen. But Lauren's visit had cracked that illusion. At noon, his burner phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You need to come now." It was Mia, Lauren's sister, who'd always thought Jake was too soft for her reckless sibling. No details, no explanation, just those 5 words. Jake's stomach dropped. He called her back, standing on the dock with the wind biting his face. "What happened happened?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. "She's in the hospital," Mia said, her voice clipped. "Collapsed 2 days ago. Dehydration, kidney issues, maybe worse. She's stable, but she's not talking much. Just saying your name." Jake's hand tightened around the phone. "Where is she?" "Tillamook Community Hospital, 20 minutes from you." "Get here." He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. The letter, still heavy in his pocket, felt like it was burning through his jacket. He grabbed his keys, told Sam he'd be back later, and drove his beat-up truck to the hospital. The small, white-tiled building smelled of antiseptic and coffee. Mia was waiting in the hallway, her dark circles and tense posture making her look older than 34. "She's inside," she said, nodding toward a closed door. Not really present, but awake. "What happened?" Jake asked, his voice low. Mia crossed her arms. She stopped eating right, barely slept, living off coffee and guilt. They found her passed out in her apartment. Neighbor called it in. Her eyes flicked over him, not unkindly but sharp. "She's been falling apart since you left." Jake's chest tightened. He pushed open the door. Lauren lay in a hospital bed, curled under a thin blanket, wires snaking from her arms to a beeping monitor. Her face was pale, her dark hair tangled against the pillow. She looked small, like a bird that had fallen from its nest. Her eyes, half open, found him, and she blinked slowly. "Jake," she whispered, barely audible. "You came." He pulled a chair to her bedside, not speaking. The room was dim, the only sound the monitor's steady rhythm. He wanted to be angry, to walk away, but her frailty held him there. She wasn't the vibrant woman from Austin, nor the desperate one on his porch. She was a shadow, and it unnerved him. "Why didn't you tell me it was this bad?" he asked finally, his voice gruff. Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. "I thought I deserved it. After what I did, I thought you were better off without me." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You don't get to decide that for me." She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I know." They sat in silence, the weight of the letter pressing against his chest. He didn't open it, didn't mention it. Instead, he watched her breathe, each inhale a small victory. Mia stepped in, breaking the moment. "They're keeping her overnight. You don't have to stay." "I'm not," Jake said, standing. But he didn't leave right away. He looked at Lauren one last time, her hand clutching the blanket, and felt something shift. Not forgiveness, but a crack in the wall he'd built. He walked out, the hospital's fluorescent lights harsh against his eyes, and drove back to Tillamook with the letter still in his pocket. That night, he sat on his cot, rereading her words. She hadn't just cheated. She'd collapsed under her own shame, and he'd been too hurt to see it. The realization didn't heal him, but it made him question how far he could run from the truth. The next day, he'd go back to the hospital, not for her, but for himself. He needed to know if she'd fight to live, or if she'd already given up. Jake Torres drove back to Tillamook Community Hospital the morning after seeing Lauren in her hospital bed, the weight of her letter still tucked in his jacket pocket. The Oregon sky was heavy with clouds, the air sharp with salt from the nearby coast. At 32, Jake had spent months rebuilding himself in this small fishing town, fixing boat engines and teaching kids like Sam how to wrench. He'd come here to escape Austin, Lauren's betrayal, the suitcase in their hallway, the photo of her laughing on another man's lap. But her collapse, her whispered Jake in a hospital, had pulled him back into her orbit. He wasn't here to save her. He was here to understand. The hospital was quieter today, the hallway empty except for Mia, Lauren's sister, who leaned against the wall with a coffee cup. Her eyes flicked up, wary but softer than yesterday. "She's awake," Mia said, nodding toward the door. "Talking more. They're saying it's dehydration and kidney stress, but she'll pull through if she takes care of herself." Jake nodded, his jaw tight. "She say anything about me?" "Mia esse lips prestin. Just that she didn't expect you to come." "Neither did I." She paused, then added, "Thanks for showing up." He didn't respond, just pushed open the door. Lauren sat propped up in bed, her dark hair pulled back, her face still pale but less fragile. The monitor beeped steadily, a reminder she was still here. Her eyes found him as she managed a small, tired smile. "You didn't have to come back," she said, her voice hoarse but stronger. "Didn't plan to," Jake replied, pulling the chair closer but not sitting. "But I'm here, so talk." She looked down at her hands, picking at the tape holding In place. "I don't know where to start." "Start with the truth," he said, his tone flat but not cruel. "The letter was a start, but I need to hear it from you." Lauren took a shaky breath, her eyes fixed on the blanket. "I didn't leave you for him, Jake. Shane, the guy in the photo, he wasn't someone I loved. He was chaos. I was drowning in my own head, and he was a way to feel something else. I'd lost my job, lied to you about it, lied to everyone. I thought if I could just run, it'd fix me." Jake crossed his arms, leaning against the wall. "You didn't run. You planned it. The suitcase, the folded clothes, you wanted me to find it." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I thought it'd make you hate me, that it'd be easier for you to move on if I was the villain. But I didn't know how to stop hurting you. I didn't know how to stop hurting myself." He wanted to snap back, to say her pain didn't excuse the photo, the lies, the way she dismantled their life. But her voice, raw and stripped of pretense, held him back. He thought of the letter, her confession of pawning her grandmother's ring, of driving through towns chasing rumors of him. She'd been unraveling long before he left Austin. "Why didn't you just tell me?" he asked, softer now. "I was there, Lauren. Every day. I would have listened." Her laugh was brittle. "You were too good, Jake. You were fixing everything. Our fights, my moods, the neighbor's car. I felt like a burden. I thought you deserved someone who wasn't falling apart." "You decided that for me," he said, his voice hardening. "You didn't give me a chance." "I know," she whispered, "and I'll carry that forever." The room fell silent, the monitor's beeps filling the space. Jake finally sat, his hand clasped tight. He didn't want to forgive her. Not yet, maybe not ever. But he couldn't ignore the truth in her eyes. She wasn't the woman in the photo anymore, just like he wasn't the man who'd emptied his bank account and fled. Mia knocked lightly and stepped in. "They're moving her to a regular room soon. You two okay?" "We're talking," Jake said, not looking away from Lauren. Mia nodded and left. Lauren reached under her pillow, pulling out a folded piece of paper, worn and creased. "This isn't for you," she said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "It's for me. Something I wrote to remind myself why I'm still here. But I need you to hold it. If I don't make it, I don't want strangers finding it." Jake took the paper, its weight heavier than it should have been. "You're not dying," he said, almost angry. "Not today," she replied, a faint smile breaking through. "But I almost did." He slipped the paper into his pocket next to the first letter, unsure why he agreed to carry her burdens again. "What now?" he asked. She looked out the window, where the Oregon sky was clearing. "I want to see the lake." The one we used to visit when we came up here. Before everything. Jake hesitated. The lake was a shore drive, a place where they'd once walked hand in hand, laughing about nothing. It felt like a lifetime ago. You're not exactly cleared for a field trip, he said. I'll ask the doctor. Tomorrow, maybe, if you'll come. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. The next day, after her discharge papers were signed, Jake drove her to the lake behind Tillamook's town hall. She was weak, leaning on his arm as they walked to a bench overlooking the water. The air was cold, the lake still, reflecting the gray clouds above. They sat, not touching, just close enough to feel the history between them. You didn't see me, Lauren said, breaking the silence. Not the real me. I was screaming inside, and you kept fixing things I didn't ask you to fix. Jake stared at the water. I thought that's what you needed. I thought I was enough. You were, she said, her voice cracking. But I didn't know how to be enough for myself. He turned to her, seeing the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of her choices. I saw you in that photo, Lauren. You looked happy. Free. I was pretending, she said. I checked my phone every day after you left, hoping you'd call, yell, anything. When you didn't, I thought I'd lost you forever. You did, he said, not cruelly but honestly. But I'm here now. Not for us. For this. She nodded, understanding. They sat longer, the lake's quiet holding their unspoken words. Jake felt the papers in his pocket. The letter he'd read, the one he hadn't. He didn't need to open the second one to know it was her trying to claw her way back to herself. He'd hold it, not out of love, but because he'd seen her fight to live. That was enough for now. Jake Torres stood on the rocky shore of Tillamook's coastline, the Oregon wind sharp against his face. It had been 3 weeks since he'd sat with Lauren by the lake, her frail frame leaning on him as she spoke of her unraveling. The 2 letters she'd given him, one he'd read, one he hadn't, sat untouched in his shack, tucked inside a toolbox drawer. At 32, Jake had built a quiet life here, fixing boat engines and trading small favors with locals. He'd come to escape Austin, to outrun the sting of Lauren's betrayal. The suitcase, the photo, the lies. But her hospital stay and their raw conversation by the lake had shifted something in him. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a clarity he hadn't expected. Lauren, now 30, was discharged from Tillamook Community Hospital the day after their lake talk. Her sister, Mia, had driven her to a small apartment in Seattle, where Lauren was starting over. Therapy, a part-time design job, a life pieced together from the wreckage. Jake helped carry her bag to the car, ignoring her weak protests. As they stood on the hospital's curb, she turned to him, her eyes clear despite the fatigue. You didn't have to come back, she said. You gave me more than I deserve. Grace isn't earned, Jake replied, his voice steady. It's given. She leaned in, her lips brushing his cheek. Not a plea, just a quiet thank you. Then she was gone, the car's taillights fading into the coastal fog. Back in Tillamook, Jake returned to his routine. Mornings at the docks, wrenching with Sam, the kid who'd become his shadow, afternoons bartering repairs for groceries or coffee. But the shack felt different now, less like a hideout and more like a choice. He'd fled Austin to disappear, thinking it would erase the pain of Lauren's affair with Shane, the man in the photo. He'd emptied his bank account, left his phone on a bus, become a ghost. But ghosts don't heal, they haunt. Lauren's letters, her collapse, her honesty by the lake forced him to see he didn't need to vanish to move forward. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Jake sat on his cot and pulled the second letter from the drawer. It was lighter than the first, the paper worn from Lauren's hands. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. She'd said it was for her, a reminder of why she was still here, not for him to carry her guilt. He slid it back into the drawer, next to the first, and felt a weight lift. Closure wasn't in the words. It was in letting them sit unread. Weeks later, Lauren called. Not often, just once every few days, her name flashing on his burner phone. No voicemails, just missed calls like she was testing if he'd answer. One night he did. Hey, she said, her voice stronger now. I made soup without burning the pot. Progress, right? Jake smiled despite himself. Big win. They talked about small things, her new job, designing logos, a stray cat she'd fed, a book he'd borrowed from Percy, the old fisherman. They didn't mention Austin, the suitcase, or Shane. It was light, careful, like 2 people stepping around broken glass, but finding solid ground. A month later, Jake drove to Seattle. Not to chase her, but to see the lake again, the one near Tillamook where they'd laid their truths bare. Lauren met him there, her hair pulled back, her face fuller, healthier. They sat on the same bench, the water calm under a rare, clear sky. "I'm not trying to be who I was," she said, staring at the lake. "I'm just trying to be someone I don't hate." "You're getting there," Jake said, meaning it. He told her about Sam's latest engine fix, about a seagull that stole his sandwich. She laughed, not the forced laugh from the photo, but a real one, quiet and earned. They didn't talk about love or the past. They didn't need to. The lake, the bench, their names carved underneath from years ago, it was enough. Jake realized he'd stopped running, not because Lauren had found him, but because he'd found himself. He'd spent months thinking healing meant erasing her, erasing Austin, but it meant building something new instead. Back in Tillamook, Jake kept working, kept teaching Sam, kept trading stories with Percy over coffee. Lauren sent a text one day, a photo of a sketch she'd finished, her first in years. "Not bad, right?" she wrote. He replied with a thumbs up, and that was enough. They talked now and then about books, weird animals she saw on walks, the soup she was perfecting. No promises, no labels, just two people who'd survived a storm and learned to stand in the quiet after. One morning, as Jake tightened a bolt on a boat's propeller, Sam asked, "You ever think about going back to the city? Starting over?" Jake paused, wiping grease from his hands. "I'm already started," he said. "Right here." The letters stayed in the drawer, unopened but not forgotten. They weren't a weight anymore, just a piece of history he didn't need to carry. Lauren was healing in Seattle, not for him, but for herself. And Jake, in his shack by the sea, was doing the same. He'd visit the lake again someday, maybe with Lauren, maybe alone. Either way, he'd sit by the water, listen to the waves, and know he'd found something stronger than betrayal, grace, given freely to her and to himself.